The sound of hoofbeats behind her on the darkening road made Hannah Kerrigan's blood run cold, and she knew with absolute certainty that whoever followed her through the New Mexico twilight meant her harm. She had stayed too late at the Hendersons' ranch, helping Mrs. Henderson deliver her fourth child, while the doctor was away tending to a mining accident up in Silver City. The baby had come hard and breech, taking hours longer than anyone expected, and now the sun had set completely over Steins Pass, leaving only the pale light of a quarter moon to guide her back to town. The road stretched empty before her, winding through rocky terrain dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes that cast strange shadows in the dim light. Hannah urged her mare faster, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a midwife, not a gunfighter, and the small derringer she carried in her medical bag would be useless at any real distance. Behind her, the hoofbeats grew louder, more insistent. There were at least 2 horses, maybe 3. She tried to tell herself it might be innocent travelers, but the way they maintained their distance, neither closing in nor falling back, told her otherwise. The year was 1878, and the Arizona-New Mexico borderlands remained wild and lawless, despite the best efforts of territorial marshals. Steins Pass sat at a crucial juncture on the southern Pacific route, attracting both legitimate travelers and the kind of men who preyed on them. Hannah had lived here for 3 years since coming west from Missouri, building a reputation as the best midwife between Lordsburg and Tucson. She knew the dangers, knew to travel armed, knew to be home before dark. Tonight, she had broken her own rules, and now she might pay for it. The lights of Steins Pass finally came into view about a mile ahead, a small cluster of buildings huddled against the vast darkness of the desert. Relief flooded through her, but the men behind her suddenly spurred their horses faster. They were closing in now, no longer pretending this was coincidence. Hannah leaned low over her mare's neck, urging every bit of speed from the exhausted animal. The mare had already carried her 12 miles from the Henderson ranch and had little left to give. A shot cracked through the night air, purposely high and wide, a warning or a game. Hannah's hands trembled on the reins, but she kept riding, kept pushing toward those distant lights that represented safety. Another shot, closer this time, and cruel laughter echoed across the empty land. Then, something massive stepped into the road ahead. Hannah nearly screamed before she realized it was a man, not a bear, though he was built like one. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the stars behind him. Long, dark hair fell past his shoulders, and even in the moonlight she could see the heavy muscle in his arms and chest beneath his buckskin shirt. He held a rifle with the casual competence of someone who had been born with one in his hands. "Get behind me," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow carried clearly over the sound of approaching hooves. Hannah did not hesitate. She recognized salvation when she saw it, even if it came in the form of a mountain man who looked like he could tear a wolf apart with his bare hands. She pulled her mare behind him and dismounted on shaking legs, one hand reaching for the small pistol in her bag. The 3 riders slowed as they approached, spreading out slightly. Hannah recognized them now in the moonlight, the Garrett brothers and their cousin, a trio of drifters who had been causing trouble around Steins Pass for the past month. The middle brother, Wade, was wanted for murder in Texas. The youngest, Cole, had tried to force his attentions on one of the saloon girls just last week. "That's our woman you got there," Wade called out, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "She's got something that belongs to us." "The lady does not know you," the mountain man said. His voice remained calm, almost conversational, but Hannah noticed how still he stood, how ready. "And she is under my protection now." "Your protection?" The eldest brother, Morgan, spat into the dirt. "We don't know you, friend. This ain't your business." "I am making it my business." Hannah watched the exchange with her heart in her throat. 3 against 1 were bad odds, no matter how intimidating the mountain man appeared. She pulled her derringer free and cocked it, the small click impossibly loud in the tense silence. "I have never seen any of you before tonight," she called out, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I have nothing of yours. You have been following me for miles with ill intent, and everyone in Steins Pass will hear about it." Cole laughed, a nasty sound. "Nobody in Steins Pass is going to believe a word you say once we finish with you. Might not be able to talk at all." The mountain man moved then, so fast Hannah barely tracked it. His rifle came up and fired in one smooth motion, and Cole's hat flew off his head, a neat hole punched through the crown. Before any of them could react, he had levered another round into the chamber and had the rifle trained on Wade. "The next one goes between your eyes," he said in that same calm voice. "You have 3 seconds to ride away and never bother this woman again. 1. "You cannot shoot all of us," Morgan snarled, but his hand moved away from his gun. 2. Wade's horse pranced nervously, sensing its rider's fear. Hannah saw the calculation in Wade's eyes, saw him weighing odds and pride, and the very real possibility of dying on this lonely road over something that had started as cruel sport. 3. "Let's go," Wade said abruptly, wheeling his horse around. "She ain't worth it." Cole grabbed his ruined hat from the ground and followed, shooting venomous looks back at them. Morgan held his ground a moment longer, glaring at the mountain man with pure hatred, before finally turning his horse and following his brothers back toward whatever hole they had crawled from. They waited in silence until the hoofbeats faded completely into the night. Hannah discovered she was shaking, her legs barely holding her upright. The derringer slipped from her numb fingers, and the mountain man caught it with his free hand before it could hit the ground. "Easy now," he said gently, turning to face her. Up close, he was even more imposing, but his dark eyes held kindness beneath the weathered exterior. "You are safe. They will not come back." "How do you know?" Hannah heard the tremor in her voice and hated it. She was 24 years old, had crossed half the continent alone after her husband died of cholera, had delivered babies in thunderstorms and drought and everything in between. She was not weak. But tonight had terrified her in ways she had not felt since those dark days after losing Robert. "Because men like that are cowards at heart," he said. "They only fight when they know they will win. Now they know I will be watching." He handed her derringer back carefully, then offered his hand. "Garrett Anderson, I have a cabin about 3 miles up in the mountains." She took his hand, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. "Hannah Kerrigan. I am the midwife in Stein's Pass." "I know who you are," he said. "You delivered Tom Wilson's baby last month. He is a friend. He said you saved both his wife and the child when things went wrong." Hannah felt surprise ripple through her exhaustion. "You know Tom?" "I trap and hunt in these mountains. I sell furs and meat to the town. Tom runs the general store." Garrett released her hand and turned to examine her mare, running expert hands down the horse's legs. "Your horse is spent. She will not make it to town tonight, not safely. It is only another mile. 1 mile on a horse this tired is enough for her to stumble and break a leg, or for those men to circle back once they think I have left." He looked up at her, and in the moonlight, his face was all hard plains and angles, like the mountains he called home. "I will walk you to town. My horse is back in those rocks, fresh and rested. I will pony your mare behind him." "I cannot ask you to do that. You've already done so much." "You're not asking. I am offering." He moved toward the rocky outcropping and emerged moments later, leading a massive roan gelding that looked strong enough to pull a wagon by itself. "Besides, I was heading that way regardless. I have pelts to sell, and I am overdue for supplies." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of independence, but practical sense won out. He was right about her mare, and he was right about the danger. The Garrett brothers had made an enemy tonight, and men like that sometimes came back for revenge. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Truly. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been here." "Nothing good," Garrett said bluntly. He tied her mare's reins to his saddle and gestured toward the road. "Can you walk? Or would you prefer to ride?" Pride warred with exhaustion. Exhaustion won. "I can walk." They set out toward the distant lights of Stein's Pass, the horses trailing behind them. The night air had turned cold the way it always did in the high desert, and Hannah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Garrett moved with the easy grace of a man completely at home in the wilderness, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness around them. "How long have you been in these mountains?" she asked, partly from curiosity and partly to fill the silence. 5 years. Came out after the war ended and just kept moving west until I found a place that felt right." "The war?" She studied his face, doing quick math. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, which would have made him young but not too young to have fought. "Army of the Potomac, infantry." His voice was flat, discouraging further questions about that particular topic. "What about you? Tom said you came from Missouri." "St. Louis. My husband and I planned to start a ranch, but he died of cholera in a wagon camp outside Tucson. I made it here and decided to stay. The old pain was distant now, muted by time and the practical necessities of survival. I had been training with a midwife back home. Stein's Pass needed one. It seemed like fate. I'm sorry about your husband. It was 3 years ago. I've made a life here. She paused, then added, a good life, despite nights like this. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds their footfalls and the soft clop of hooves on packed earth. The lights of town grew gradually closer, resolving into individual windows in the larger glow of the saloon. Hannah found herself studying Garrett from the corner of her eye. He truly was built like the mountains he lived in, all solid muscle and enduring strength. His long hair and buckskin clothing marked him as a man apart from civilization, but there was nothing savage or frightening about him, despite his size and obvious capacity for violence. If anything, she felt safer walking beside him than she had in years. Those men, she said eventually, the Garrett brothers, will they really leave me alone now? He was quiet for several steps before answering. They will think twice before bothering you again, and I will make sure word gets around that you are under my protection. That should keep most trouble away. You would do that? For someone you just met? Garrett glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Tom Wilson is not the only one who knows your reputation, Mrs. Kerrigan. You have helped half the families within 50 miles of here. You rode through a sandstorm to reach Sarah Martinez when she went into labor early. You sat with old Henry Cooper for 2 days when he was dying, making sure he was not alone at the end, even though he could not pay you. You are a good woman in a hard land. Yes, I would protect you. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the exertion of walking. How do you know all that? I listen, and I pay attention to what matters. He shifted his rifle to his other hand. Stein's Pass is lucky to have you. They were entering the outskirts of town now, passing the first scattered buildings. A few people were still out despite the late hour, and Hannah saw heads turn as they walked down the main street. She knew what they would see. The respectable midwife being escorted by a mountain man who looked like something from a legend, both of them armed and trail-worn. By morning, the whole town would be buzzing with speculation. Let them talk, she thought. She was alive, and that was what mattered. Her small house sat at the end of a side street, a neat adobe structure with a small barn out back for her mare, and a garden she somehow kept alive despite the harsh climate. Garrett walked her all the way to her door, then set about unsaddling her horse and seeing it properly settled with feed and water. Hannah watched from her doorway, touched by his casual assumption of these tasks. When he finished with the mare, he led his own horse to a hitching post out front and returned to where she stood. Do you have a good lock on your door? Yes, and bars for the windows. Use them tonight, all of them. He glanced up and down the street, his eyes missing nothing. I will be nearby. Nearby? What do you mean? Garrett gestured to the covered porch that ran along the front of her house. I will be right here. If those men are stupid enough to come back, they will have to go through me to get to you. Hannah stared at him. You cannot mean to stay out here all night. You should go to the hotel, get a room, rest properly. I have slept in worse places than a porch. I will be fine. But, Mrs. Kerrigan. He looked at her steadily, and she saw the absolute determination in his face. Those men were hunting you. I ran them off, but that might only make them angrier. I will not leave you unprotected. If it eases your mind, I was planning to stay in town tonight anyway for my supply run tomorrow. This way, I save the cost of a hotel room. She knew she should argue more, should maintain proper boundaries, should worry about her reputation. Instead, she found herself saying, At least let me bring you some blankets and coffee. Have you eaten? A faint smile crossed his weathered face, the first she had seen. It transformed him, making him seem younger and far less intimidating. I ate this afternoon, but coffee would be welcome, and I will not refuse blankets. Hannah hurried inside, her mind racing. She stoked the fire in her small stove and put coffee onto heat while she gathered her warmest spare blankets. Through the window, she could see Garrett moving around her small property, checking the barn, examining the approaches to the house, positioning himself where he would have the best vantage point of all directions. He moved like a wolf, she thought, silent and deadly and utterly capable. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and brought them outside along with the blankets. Garrett had settled onto the porch bench, his rifle across his knees, his back against the wall where he could see both the street and the door. "This is not necessary," she said again, but with less conviction. The truth was, his presence made her feel immeasurably safer. "Yes, it is." He accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his large hands around the tin cup. "And before you worry, I will not tell anyone what happened tonight unless you want me to. Your reputation will stay intact. I am less worried about my reputation than I am about you spending a cold night on my porch when you have done nothing to deserve it." "I have done everything to deserve it," he said. "You help people. That is all the deserving anyone needs." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. The saloon was still going strong, piano music and laughter drifting on the cold night air. Somewhere a dog barked and a baby cried briefly before being soothed. "Tell me about your cabin," Hannah said. She was not ready to go inside yet, not ready to end this strange, intimate moment with a man she had known for less than an hour, but who had already saved her life. Garrett's expression softened. "It is up near the pass, tucked into a canyon where there's good water year-round. I built it from pine logs 3 years ago. It is small but solid, and the hunting is good. In winter, I can watch the snow fall from my front porch and not see another human soul for weeks if I choose." "Does that not get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I grew up in a big family, 6 brothers and 3 sisters, always noise and chaos and people everywhere. After the war, I needed quiet, needed space to remember who I was before all that killing." Hannah heard the pain beneath his words and understood. She had her own ghosts, her own reasons for accepting the isolation of Stein's Pass. "I understand needing space. After Robert died, everyone in St. Louis wanted to tell me what to do, where to live, how to mourn. Coming west was the only way I could breathe again." "Robert was your husband?" "Yes. We had only been married a year when the cholera took him. He was a good man, gentle and kind. He would have made a wonderful father." She stared into her coffee cup, seeing the past reflected there. "But that was not our path. My path brought me here to this strange little town full of miners and ranchers and wanderers, and I have been happy mostly. I have purpose, I have work that matters. That is more than most people can say. What about you? Do you have purpose up in your mountain canyon?" Garrett considered the question. "I have peace. Maybe that is the same thing." They finished their coffee, and Hannah reluctantly stood. "I should let you rest, and I need to sleep myself. I have 2 women due within the next week, and babies never come when it is convenient. Sleep well, Mrs. Kerrigan. I will be here if you need anything." "Hannah," she said impulsively, "you saved my life tonight. I think that earns you the right to use my given name." His smile returned, warming his dark eyes. "Hannah, then, and you may call me Garrett." "Thank you, Garrett, for everything." She went inside and barred the door, then moved through the house checking windows and securing shutters. Through the front window, she could see Garrett's silhouette on the porch, rifle across his knees, as still and watchful as a statue. The sight should have been strange or alarming, but instead it filled her with a sense of security she had not felt since Robert died. Hannah changed into her nightgown and lay down in her narrow bed, expecting to toss and turn with the night's adrenaline still coursing through her. Instead, she fell asleep almost instantly, knowing that someone was watching over her, someone strong and capable and good. She woke once in the deepest part of night and went to the window. Garrett was still there, wrapped in the blankets she had given him, his eyes open and alert. As if sensing her gaze, he turned his head and nodded once. She nodded back and returned to bed, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. When dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, Hannah rose and dressed quickly. She built up the fire and made a proper breakfast, frying bacon and eggs and making fresh biscuits with practiced efficiency. When everything was ready, she brought a plate outside to where Garrett still sat, now bathed in early morning light. "You stayed all night," she said, though it was obvious. "I said I would." He accepted the plate with obvious appreciation. "And before you ask, yes, it was necessary. Wade Garrett rode past twice during the night, just watching. He did not stop when he saw me here. Hannah's blood ran cold. He came back? Just to check if I had left. When he saw I had not, he rode away. He will not return now. Men like him understand one thing, and that is strength. He knows now that bothering you means dealing with me. Garrett ate with the efficiency of a man used to taking nourishment when and where he could. These are the best biscuits I have had in 5 years. Thank you. She sat beside him on the porch bench, her own plate balanced on her knees. They ate in comfortable silence while the town woke around them. Shopkeepers opened their stores, women headed to the well for water, and a freight wagon rumbled past loaded with mining equipment. I need to make my supply run this morning, Garrett said when he finished eating. But I will stop by before I leave town, make sure everything is well. You have done more than enough. I cannot expect you to keep protecting me. You are not expecting it. I am offering it. He stood and stretched, and Hannah tried not to stare at the way his muscles moved under his shirt. Besides, I come to town once a month anyway. I will just make sure to stop by your place each time, unless you object. Did she object? Hannah examined her feelings carefully. This man was essentially a stranger, despite the strange bond forged by danger and gratitude. But there was something about him, something solid and trustworthy that called to a lonely part of her she usually kept buried under layers of busy work and community service. I do not object, she said quietly. I would welcome it, in fact. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Good. Now I should let you get on with your day, and I should get my trading done before the best goods are picked over. He gathered his blankets and handed them to her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Hannah felt a jolt at the contact that had nothing to do with static and everything to do with the man himself. From the way his eyes widened slightly, she thought he might have felt it too. Be safe, Garrett Anderson, she said. Be safe, Hannah Kerrigan. He mounted his roan gelding with the ease of someone who had been born in a saddle and rode away down the street toward the general store. Hannah watched until he disappeared around a corner, then went inside to face her own day. But as she cleaned the dishes and prepared her medical supplies for whatever the day might bring, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the mountain man who had walked her home and watched her door till dawn. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Hannah delivered Martha Simmons's 5th child, a healthy baby girl who came squalling into the world with impressive lung power. She treated a miner for a broken arm, stitched up a cowboy who had gotten into a fight at the saloon, and sat with elderly Mrs. Patterson as she slowly recovered from pneumonia. Every day was full, every night exhausted, but through it all, Hannah found herself thinking about Garrett. True to his word, he stopped by her house that first morning before leaving town. He brought her fresh venison and asked if she needed anything from his next trip to Lordsburg. She declined the venison, saying it was too much, but he left it anyway with a firm insistence that she needed to eat properly if she was going to keep helping everyone else. The venison ended up making the best stew she had tasted in months. Hannah asked Tom Wilson about Garrett when she went to the general store for supplies. Tom's weathered face creased into a smile at the question. Garrett Anderson? Best man I know, and I do not say that lightly. He helped me build my barn when I first came here, would not take a penny for it. Brought meat to the Gonzalez family all last winter when Pedro was hurt and could not work. Found little Emma Porter when she wandered off into the desert and searched for 6 hours in killing heat until he tracked her down. He is a quiet man, keeps to himself mostly, but when someone needs help, he's always there. He seems very capable, Hannah said carefully, trying not to show too much interest. Tom gave her a knowing look. Heard about what happened with the Garrett brothers. Whole town has been talking about it. Those men left town the next day and have not been back since. Word is they are telling people in Lordsburg that Garrett Anderson is protecting you, and nobody should bother you unless they want to answer to him. He barely knows me. Garrett does not measure friendship by time. He measures it by character. And from what I hear, he took your measure that night and decided you were worth protecting. Tom wrapped her flour and sugar in brown paper. If I were you, I would not push him away. Good men are rare in this territory. Hannah thought about Tom's words as she walked home. Was Garrett a good man? Everything she had seen and heard suggested he was. But what did it mean that he had claimed protection over her? In this rough territory, such a claim was significant. It meant other men would think twice before bothering her. It also meant people would assume there was something between them, whether there was or not, and what if there could be something between them? The thought arrived unbidden, but once it appeared, she could not dismiss it. She had not thought about another man since Robert's death. Her grief, and then her work, had consumed her completely. But Garrett had awakened something in her, some combination of curiosity and attraction, and simple appreciation for his strength and kindness. She was still turning these thoughts over when a rider arrived at her door 3 days after Garrett left. The man was a stranger, dressed in trail-worn clothing and sporting a marshal's badge. "Mrs. Kerrigan? I am Marshal Stevens from Silver City. I wanted to ask you about an incident involving the Garrett brothers." Hannah invited him in and offered coffee, which he accepted gratefully. She recounted the events of that night, leaving out nothing. Marshal Stevens listened carefully, making occasional notes. "And this Garrett Anderson, he fired on them?" "He fired over their heads as a warning. He did not hurt anyone, though he certainly could have. The Garrett brothers are claiming he robbed them and ran them out of town." "That is a lie," Hannah said flatly. "They followed me with ill intent. Garrett saved me from whatever they planned to do. He's a good man." "I have heard that about him. I just needed to hear your account." Stevens closed his notebook. "Wade Garrett is wanted for murder in Texas, did you know? He killed a woman in a dispute over gambling debts, beat her to death with his fists." Horror washed over Hannah. That could have been her fate if Garrett had not appeared. "Are you going to arrest him?" "If I can find him." The brothers split up after leaving Stein's Pass. Wade went south toward the border, or so I hear. I will catch up to him eventually. Stevens stood. "In the meantime, Mrs. Kerrigan, you be careful. Men like that sometimes hold grudges." After he left, Hannah sat in her quiet house and felt the full weight of how close she had come to disaster. Wade Garrett had killed before and would not have hesitated to kill again. If she had been alone on that road, if Garrett Anderson had not appeared like an avenging angel, she would be dead or worse. She was still shaken that evening when a knock came at her door. She answered with her derringer in her pocket, but her fear melted away when she saw Garrett standing on her porch, hat in hand. "I heard the marshal came by," he said. "Wanted to make sure you were all right." "How did you hear? You were supposed to be up in your cabin." "I was. But Tom sent his son to tell me the marshal was asking about me. I came down to make sure there was no trouble." He looked worried. "Did I cause problems for you?" "No. No, Garrett, you saved my life." She stepped back. "Come in, please." He hesitated, clearly aware of the propriety issues involved, but finally stepped inside. His large frame seemed to fill her small sitting room. Hannah poured coffee with shaking hands, only realizing how badly she was trembling when Garrett gently took the pot from her and set it down. "What's wrong?" he asked. "The marshal told me about Wade Garrett, that he killed a woman in Texas. That could have been me." She looked up at him, tears pricking her eyes. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you had not been there. But I was there. And you were safe." Garrett's hands came up to rest on her shoulders, warm and steadying. "You are safe, Hannah." She leaned into him without thinking, and his arms came around her, holding her carefully as if she were something precious. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and clean sweat, and his chest was solid as a wall against her cheek. Hannah let herself take comfort in his strength, let herself feel protected and valued. When she finally pulled back, she saw something in his dark eyes that made her breath catch. Garrett, I should go," he said, but he did not move, did not release her. "I should not be here like this." "Why not?" "Because you are a respectable woman, and I am just a mountain man who lives in a cabin and talks to deer more than people. Because I have known you less than 2 weeks, and I have no right to feel what I am feeling." His jaw worked. "Because if I stay, I'm going to want to kiss you, and that would be wrong." Hannah's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What if I wanted you to kiss me?" "Hannah, I'm serious. What if I've been thinking about you every day since that night? What if I've been hoping you would come back? What if—" He kissed her. His lips were surprisingly gentle for a man so large and rough, and his hands cradled her face with exquisite care. Hannah melted into the kiss, her own hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the heavy muscle beneath his shirt. Heat flooded through her, desire she had thought dead springing back to life with startling intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since I first saw you on that road." "Then why did you wait?" "Because I wanted to be sure. Sure that you felt something too. Sure that I was not taking advantage of your gratitude." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "I'm not a rich man, Hannah. I have my cabin and my horses and my traps. I have no education beyond what the army taught me and what I learned from living rough. But I am a good man, and I would treat you right if you gave me the chance." "I know you are a good man. I've heard nothing but good things about you from everyone in town." "Then give me permission to court you properly. Let me come down from my mountain once a week and take you to dinner or walk with you or just sit on your porch and talk. Let me prove that what I feel is real and lasting." Hannah looked at this man who had appeared in her life like something from a storybook. This mountain man with his long hair and buckskin and gentle eyes. Everything sensible in her said this was too fast, too soon, that she barely knew him. But her heart, that organ she had thought permanently frozen, was singing a different song. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Garrett Anderson, you may court me." His smile was like the sunrise, and when he kissed her again, she felt as if she were finally, truly home. The next 3 months transformed Hannah's life in ways she could not have imagined. True to his word, Garrett came down from his mountain cabin every week without fail. Sometimes he arrived on Tuesday, sometimes on Saturday. But he always came, and he always brought something, fresh meat or berries he had picked, or once, memorably, a bouquet of wildflowers that he had clearly gone far out of his way to find. Their courtship unfolded slowly and sweetly. Garrett was unfailingly respectful, always conscious of Hannah's reputation in the small town. They took walks along the road where they had first met, visited the Wilsons for dinner, attended a barn dance where Garrett proved surprisingly graceful despite his size. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams and fears. Hannah learned that Garrett had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith, and that he had joined the army at 17 because he wanted adventure. He got more adventure than he bargained for at places like Gettysburg and Antietam, and came home a changed man. His family tried to welcome him back into their life, but he could not settle, could not adjust to the noise and crowds and expectations. So he drifted west until he found these mountains, and here he had finally found peace. Garrett learned that Hannah had always wanted to be a healer, that she had watched her mother and grandmother tend the sick in their Missouri community, and knew from childhood what her calling was. Her marriage to Robert had been a love match, but a young love, sweet and innocent. His death had devastated her, but it had also shown her a strength she did not know she possessed. Coming west alone, building a new life, these things had forged her into someone different than the sheltered girl who had left St. Louis. "I like who you have become," Garrett told her one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. "You are strong and capable and kind. You face hard things and do not flinch." "I learned it from watching you," Hannah said. "The way you move through the world, quiet and strong, helping people because it is right, not because you want thanks or recognition. That is real strength." He took her hand, his large, calloused fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. They sat like that until the stars came out, not needing words, just comfortable in each other's presence. The town watched their courtship with approval and fascination. Tom Wilson told anyone who would listen that he had known they were perfect for each other from the start. Mrs. Henderson insisted on feeding them both whenever Garrett came to town, saying he was too thin from living alone. Even crusty old Doc Morrison, who had been skeptical of Hannah when she first arrived, pronounced them a good match. "That man will keep you safe, and you will keep him civilized," the doctor said. "Good combination for this territory." Not everyone was pleased. Some of the single men in town who had harbored hopes regarding the pretty young widow grumbled about mountain men who came down and stole the best women. And there were a few church ladies who thought the courtship was progressing too fast, that Hannah should maintain a longer mourning period regardless of how long Robert had been dead. Hannah ignored the gossips and listened to her heart. She was falling in love with Garrett Anderson, truly and deeply in love, and the feeling was glorious. She had loved Robert, but that had been the love of youth, untested and idealistic. What she felt for Garrett was different, more mature, built on mutual respect and shared values. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his competence and his humility. She loved the way he listened when she talked about her work, asking intelligent questions and remembering details from previous conversations. She loved how he could make her laugh with dry observations about town characters, and how he held her as if she were something precious. And the physical attraction, that was something new entirely. Robert had been her first and only lover, and their intimacy had been sweet but tentative, neither of them quite sure what they were doing. She looked at Garrett and wanted him with an intensity that sometimes shocked her. The way his muscles moved beneath his shirts, the strength in his hands, the rare smile that transformed his harsh features, all of it combined to create a desire she barely knew how to handle. Garrett seemed to share her feelings if the heat in his eyes when he looked at her was any indication, but he never pushed, never presumed. His kisses grew more passionate over time, his hands bolder in their explorations, but he always stopped before things went too far. Hannah appreciated his respect, even as she ached for more. 4 months into their courtship, Garrett arrived at her door on a Thursday afternoon with a serious expression on his face. Hannah was just finishing up treating a child's scraped knee, and she sent the boy running home with a peppermint stick before turning her attention to Garrett. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing is wrong, but we need to talk." He took off his hat and turned it in his hands, suddenly nervous in a way she had never seen. "Can we sit?" They settled onto a porch bench, and Hannah waited with her heart hammering. Garrett stared at his hat for a long moment before finally speaking. "I love you, Hannah. I have loved you since the night I walked you home, if I'm being honest. Every day I spend with you, that love grows stronger. You are the finest woman I have ever known, and the thought of spending my life without you is unbearable." Hannah's breath caught. "Garrett, let me finish, please." He set his hat aside and took her hands. "I know I am not what most women want. I'm rough and uneducated, and I live in a cabin on a mountain. I do not have much money saved, and what I do have comes from trapping and hunting, which is hard, uncertain work. But I would build you a better house, a real home. I would provide for you and protect you and love you every day for the rest of my life. And I am asking, Hannah Kerrigan, if you would consider becoming my wife." Joy exploded through Hannah's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, Garrett, I will marry you." His face transformed, relief and happiness washing away the tension. "You will? Truly? Truly. I love you, Garrett Anderson. I love your strength and your kindness and your quiet ways. I love how safe I feel with you, and how you make me laugh, and how you look at me like I am the most important person in the world. I would be honored to be your wife." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, his arms coming around her to lift her right off the bench. Hannah wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with everything she felt, all the love and desire and happiness overflowing. When they finally broke apart, both laughing breathlessly, Garrett set her down gently but did not let her go. "I do not have a ring yet," he said. "I wanted to make sure you would say yes before I spent the money. I do not need a ring. I just need you. You will have both, and a proper wedding with a preacher and witnesses and everything done right." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips again. "When? How soon can we marry? How soon can you be ready?" "I am ready now. I have been ready since the day I met you." They decided on 6 weeks, enough time to post banns and arrange a proper ceremony, but not so long that they would go crazy with waiting. Hannah threw herself into preparations with the help of half the women in town. Mrs. Henderson made her a dress of pale blue calico that brought out her eyes. Tom Wilson's wife contributed lace for the collar and cuffs. Even the church ladies who had clucked over the speed of the courtship got caught up in the excitement and insisted on organizing a community celebration after the ceremony. Garrett spent his time working frantically on the cabin, true to his word about building a proper home. He added a whole new room for Hannah to use for her midwifery supplies and patient care, built a better barn for their horses, and even installed real glass windows he had ordered from Lordsburg. Tom went up to see the work and came back shaking his head in amazement. "That man has built you a palace up there," he told Hannah. "Well, a cabin palace, but still, The craftsmanship is incredible. He is doing everything himself, dawn to dusk, and it shows in the quality. Hannah rode up to see the cabin 2 weeks before the wedding, accompanied by Tom and his wife for propriety's sake. The moment she saw it, tears pricked her eyes. The cabin was beautiful, solid, and well-made, nestled into a canyon with a spring-fed creek running nearby. The new room Garrett had built was perfect, with counter space for her supplies and good light from the new windows. He had even built shelves exactly the right size for her medicine bottles and instruments. "This is perfect," she breathed. "Garrett, this is amazing." He stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, looking pleased but embarrassed by her praise. "I want you to be happy here. I want it to feel like home." "It already does." The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and comfortable temperatures rare for New Mexico in August 1878. The ceremony took place in Steins Pass's small church, with what seemed like half the territory crammed into the pews. Hannah wore her blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Garrett wore new dark trousers and a white shirt, his long hair pulled back neatly. He looked impossibly handsome and unbearably nervous as Hannah walked down the short aisle to join him. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony, and when he asked if anyone objected, there was only supportive silence. Garrett's voice was strong and sure when he said his vows, and Hannah's did not waver. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Garrett kissed her with such tender passion that several women in the audience sighed audibly. The celebration afterward was epic by Steins Pass standards. Tables groaned under potluck contributions, the saloon provided free beer for the men and lemonade for the ladies, and someone brought a fiddle and accordion so there could be dancing. Hannah danced with Garrett until her feet ached, then danced some more because she could not bear to stop, to end this perfect day. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and rode out toward Garrett's cabin, now their cabin, their home. Garrett had loaded Hannah's belongings earlier in the week, so there was nothing to delay them, nothing to keep them from beginning their new life together. The ride up to the cabin took 2 hours, following a winding trail through increasingly rugged terrain. Hannah rode beside Garrett, their horses walking companionably side by side, and felt peace settle over her. This was right. This was where she belonged. Full darkness had fallen by the time they reached the cabin, but Garrett had left lanterns lit inside so golden light spilled from the windows in welcome. He helped Hannah down from her horse and swept her into his arms before she could protest. "I know we are already in the mountains, but I'm carrying my bride over the threshold properly," he said, and she laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. Garrett set her down gently and lit more lanterns, revealing a space that was rustic but comfortable. The main room held a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, and a bed piled high with quilts and furs. Her medical supplies were neatly arranged in the new room, and a pot of stew sat warming over the fire. "I thought you might be hungry," Garrett said, "though I will warn you I am not much of a cook." "I am not hungry for food," Hannah said boldly, and watched his eyes darken with desire. "Hannah, are you sure? We can wait. There is no rush." She stepped close to him, reaching up to pull the leather tie from his hair and let it fall loose around his shoulders. "I am sure. I have been sure for months. I love you, Garrett, and I want to be your wife in every way." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, his hands coming up to cup her face. Hannah pressed against him, feeling the hard muscle of his chest and arms, feeling his desire for her in the way he held her. They undressed each other slowly, taking time to explore and appreciate, building the anticipation until Hannah thought she might combust from wanting him. Their coming together was passionate and tender, careful and wild by turns. Garrett was an attentive lover, paying attention to what made her gasp and moan, learning her body with the same focus he brought to everything he did. Hannah let herself be free in a way she never had before, giving herself completely to this man she loved with all her heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Hannah's head on Garrett's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal. His hands stroked idly through her hair, and she had never felt so content, so perfectly at peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," he whispered back. "Thank you for taking a chance on a mountain man. Thank you for walking me home that night." They slept deeply, wrapped in each other's arms, and woke with the sun to begin their new life together. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, as any marriage would be. Hannah had to get used to living so far from town, to the isolation and the wilderness. Garrett had to adjust to sharing his space after years of living alone, to considering someone else's needs and preferences. But they worked through every challenge with patience and communication, and a deep well of love that sustained them through the difficult moments. Hannah established a pattern of spending 3 days a week in town, staying with the Wilsons when needed for longer cases, then returning to the cabin for the rest of the week. Garrett built her a small shed in town to store supplies she needed to keep close, and he often accompanied her on calls, especially the longer or more dangerous ones. The community came to depend on both of them, the midwife and her mountain man protector. Their love deepened as they built a life together. Garrett taught Hannah to track and shoot better, to read the weather and the animals, to move through the wilderness with confidence. Hannah taught Garrett to read and write better, sharing books she had brought from Missouri and delighting in his quick mind and eagerness to learn. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing, worked side by side on the cabin and the animals, made love with passionate intensity, and built a partnership that was stronger than either of them alone. A year into their marriage, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She had begun to wonder if children were possible for them, knowing that her brief marriage to Robert had produced no babies. But her monthly courses stopped, her breasts became tender, and the telltale nausea arrived right on schedule. She told Garrett on a Sunday morning as they lay in bed, watching the sunrise through their window. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy and wonder and a fierce protective tenderness that made her cry happy tears. He placed his large hand on her still flat belly and swore to her and their unborn child that he would always keep them safe, always provide for them, always love them with everything he had. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Hannah's understandable anxiety about childbirth. She had seen too many things go wrong to be completely confident, but she had faith in her own body and knowledge. Garrett hovered protectively, often driving her crazy with his concern, but she could not really be angry when it came from such deep love. In March of 1880, with a spring snowstorm howling outside the cabin, Hannah went into labor. She had planned to go down to town when the time came, to have another midwife assist her. But the baby came early and the storm made travel impossible. So it was just Hannah and Garrett, and she had to trust him completely as the contractions built in intensity. Garrett was magnificent. He followed her instructions exactly, keeping the fire high and water boiling, supporting her through contractions, staying calm even when she could see the fear in his eyes. When the final pushes came and Hannah bore down with everything she had, Garrett was there to catch their child, to lift the squalling infant carefully and place the baby on Hannah's chest with tears streaming down his face. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "We have a son, Hannah." Their son was perfect, healthy, and whole, with a surprisingly loud cry in his father's dark hair. They named him Grant Robert Anderson, honoring Garrett's middle name and Hannah's first husband, and from the moment he drew breath, he owned both their hearts completely. Fatherhood suited Garrett. He was endlessly patient with Grant, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, carrying him in a sling against his broad chest as he did chores around the cabin. As Grant grew from infant to toddler to young boy, Garrett taught him about the mountains and the animals, about honor and kindness, and what it meant to be a good man. Hannah watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing depths of gentleness she had not known were possible. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter they named Grace Mary and another son they called James. The cabin had to be expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and their life became a beautiful chaos of children and work and love. Hannah continued her midwifery, though less frequently as the children grew, and Garrett's trapping and hunting provided steady income. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. The years passed in the way they do when life is full and good. Grant grew tall and strong like his father, while Grace inherited her mother's quick mind and healing touch. James was the wild one, always exploring, always pushing boundaries, keeping them on their toes. They were a family, bound by love and shared purpose, carving out a good life in the harsh beauty of the New Mexico mountains. Hannah sometimes thought back to that night on the road when she had been followed and frightened and certain she was going to die. She thought about how one moment, one person appearing at the right time had changed everything. If Garrett had not been there, if he had chosen a different path or delayed his trip to town by even an hour, her life would have been so different. Instead, she had found love and partnership and a family beyond anything she could have imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they left the children with Tom and his wife and rode out to the place where they had first met. It looked the same, the road winding through rocky desert, mesquite bushes casting long shadows in the afternoon light. But everything was different now because of what had happened here. "Do you ever regret it?" Hannah asked, standing in the circle of Garrett's arms. "Giving up your solitary life for marriage and children and chaos?" "Not for a single second," he said immediately. "You and the children are the best things that ever happened to me. Before you, I was just surviving. Now I'm living." "I love you, Garrett Anderson. Thank you for walking me home that night." "I love you, Hannah Anderson. Thank you for letting me stay." They kissed as the sun set over the desert, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. The road where they stood had seen violence and fear that night 10 years ago, but it had also been the beginning of something wonderful. As they rode back toward the cabin and their waiting children, Hannah thought about all the women she had helped over the years, all the babies she had delivered, all the families she had supported through crisis and joy. It was good work, important work, and she was proud of it. But her greatest joy, her deepest satisfaction, came from the family she had built with Garrett, from the love they shared that had grown stronger with every passing year. Their cabin came into view as darkness fell, lights glowing warmly in the windows. They could hear the children's laughter before they even dismounted, and Hannah felt the familiar swell of contentment that came from knowing she was home. Grant ran out to take the horses, tall and responsible at nearly 10 years old. Grace appeared in the doorway with James on her hip, both of them grinning with excitement about their parents' return. Garrett helped Hannah down from her horse, and they walked together toward their children, toward their home, toward the life they had built together through love and luck and the simple act of one person choosing to help another on a dark road long ago. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges as they always do. Grant grew into a young man much like his father, quiet and capable and strong. He learned trapping and hunting from Garrett, but also developed a talent for carpentry, building furniture that was both functional and beautiful. Grace became Hannah's apprentice, showing a natural gift for healing that surpassed even her mother's considerable skills. By the time she was 16, Grace was delivering babies on her own under Hannah's supervision, and Hannah knew her work would continue long after she herself was gone. James, true to his wild nature, joined the Territorial Rangers when he turned 18, much to his parents' mixed pride and terror. He came home on leave when he could, full of stories about tracking outlaws and protecting settlements, and Hannah would hold him tight and pray for his safety until Garrett gently reminded her that their son was a grown man who had to make his own way. Hannah and Garrett grew older together, their faces gaining lines and their hair going gray, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable, the foundation on which everything else in their lives was built. They still took walks together when they could, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still made love with a passion that surprised them both given their advancing years. On a cool October evening in 1895, 17 years after their wedding, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Grant was building his own cabin a few miles away, preparing to bring home the bride he had courted for the past year. Grace was in town helping a difficult birth, and James was somewhere in Arizona tracking cattle rustlers. "We did well," Hannah said, leaning against Garrett's solid shoulder. "Our children are good people. We should be proud." "I am proud, of them and of you." Garrett's arm came around her, holding her close. "You built all this, you know. You took a scared mountain man and civilized him, gave him a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. You were never just surviving. You were always helping people, always doing good. I just gave you a different reason to come down from your mountain." "The best reason," he kissed the top of her head. "What do you want to do with all our free time now that the children are grown? We could travel, see some of the places we have always talked about." I want to stay right here, Hannah said. I want to help Grace with her practice, spoil our grandchildren when Grant and his wife start having babies, and sit on this porch with you watching sunsets. That is all the adventure I need. Sounds perfect to me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the familiar landscape spreading out before them. This was home, this cabin Garrett had built with his own hands, these mountains that had sheltered them, this life they had created together from a chance meeting on a dark road. Hannah thought about the young widow she had been, lost and lonely despite her purpose and her work. She thought about how close she had come to dying that night, to never knowing this life, this love, this family. And she thought about Garrett, appearing when she needed him most, protecting her not just that one night but every day since. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For walking me home, for watching my door until dawn, for staying." Garrett turned to look at her, his dark eyes still as intense as they had been that first night. "Hannah Anderson, I would walk you home 1,000 times. I would watch your door for 1,000 nights. I would stay for 1,000 lifetimes if I could, because you are the best thing that ever happened to me." She kissed him as the first stars appeared, a kiss that held 17 years of love and partnership and unshakable commitment. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, the night had settled fully over the mountains, but the cabin glowed with warmth and light behind them. They went inside together, to the home they had built, to the life they shared, to the love that had sustained them through everything. And if you had asked either of them if they believed in fate, in meant to be, in the power of one person appearing at exactly the right moment to change everything, they would have said yes without hesitation. Because that was their story, the story of how a frightened woman on a dark road met a mountain man who chose to help, and how that single act of kindness grew into something neither of them could have imagined. It was a story of love and protection, of building a life together against the harsh beauty of the frontier, of finding home not in a place but in another person. The years that followed brought more joys and sorrows, as all lives do. Grant married his sweetheart Sarah and gave Hannah and Garrett their first grandchild, a boy they named Garrett Jr., who immediately became the light of his grandfather's life. Grace married a young doctor who came through Stein's Pass and was smart enough to recognize her gifts, and together they opened a proper medical practice that served the whole territory. James eventually left the Rangers and came home to help his father with the trapping business, having seen enough violence and wanting the peace of the mountains. Hannah delivered 18 grandchildren over the years, each one a miracle, each one evidence of the legacy she and Garrett had created. Their children and grandchildren were good people, kind and strong and capable, carrying forward the values Hannah and Garrett had instilled in them. In the spring of 1908, 30 years after that night on the road, Garrett fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then a weakness that no amount of rest seemed to cure. Hannah knew what it was even before Doc Morrison confirmed it. Lung fever, probably from years of living rough and breathing cold mountain air and pushing his body beyond its limits. She nursed him with everything she had, using every skill she had learned in 40 years of healing. But some things could not be fixed with medicine and determination. Garrett grew weaker despite her efforts, and by June it was clear he would not recover. Their children gathered, bringing the grandchildren, filling the cabin with family. Garrett held court from his bed, dispensing wisdom and love and final instructions with the same quiet strength he had always shown. But his eyes always found Hannah, followed her around the room, held her close when she lay beside him at night. "I am not afraid," he told her one evening when they were alone. "I have had a good life, a better life than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that, Hannah. You gave me everything." "Do not talk like that," she said, tears streaming down her face, even though she knew the truth of what was coming. "You have to fight, Garrett. I need you. You are the strongest woman I know. You will be fine." His hand, still large but frighteningly thin now, came up to cup her cheek. "But I'm tired, my love. So tired, and I need you to let me go." "I do not know how to let you go. The same way you do everything, with courage and grace and that fierce heart that first made me love you." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart skip. "I will wait for you. wherever we go after this. And when your time comes, I will be there to walk you home again." Garrett Anderson died 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Hannah holding his hand and whispering that she loved him right up until his last breath. The grief nearly broke her, this loss of the man who had been her partner and protector for 30 years, but she survived it because he had been right. She was strong, and she had work to do, grandchildren to spoil, a community that still needed her skills. Hannah lived another 12 years, staying in the cabin Garrett had built, helping Grace with her medical practice, teaching her granddaughters the art of midwifery. She told stories about Garrett to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, making sure the grandchildren who had never known him understood what a remarkable man he had been. On a clear night in November 1920, Hannah Kerrigan Anderson closed her eyes for the last time at the age of 76. Grace found her the next morning, peaceful in her sleep, a small smile on her face. They buried her next to Garrett in the little cemetery outside Steins Pass, under a headstone that read, "Hannah Anderson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and healer. She walked with courage." And if you had been there at her funeral, you would have seen 3 generations of the family she and Garrett had created, dozens of people who existed, because one frightened woman met one brave man on a dark road long ago. The cabin still stands today, maintained by the Anderson descendants who recognize it as the foundation of their family history. If you visit, you can see where Garrett built the addition for Hannah's medical supplies, where they raised their children, where they built a life together that echoed through generations. And on quiet nights, locals say, you can sometimes see 2 figures on the porch, sitting close together, watching the sunset over the mountains they loved. It is just a story, of course, the kind of romantic tale people tell about the Old West. But for those who knew Hannah and Garrett Anderson, who saw the way they loved each other, who benefited from their kindness and strength, it was more than a story. It was a testament to what one moment of bravery, one act of protection, one decision to stay could become. Because in the end, their story was simple. She was being followed on a dark road at night. A mountain man walked her home and watched her door till dawn. And from that single night grew a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a family that spread across the West, and a legacy of compassion and courage that lived on long after they were gone. That is the story of Hannah and Garrett Anderson. That is the story of how sometimes, when everything seems darkest, the right person appears at the right moment and changes everything. That is the story of true love, frontier style, built on protection and respect, and the simple act of choosing to stay. And it is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth believing in, because stories like this remind us that goodness exists, that love endures, and that sometimes, against all odds, we find exactly what we need when we need it most. The end.